Okay, hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. It usually takes a few minutes for people to kind of trickle in gradually, but I will attempt to fill those few minutes with my kind of introductory waffle here, so you don't miss any of the good stuff. But welcome to today's webinar discussion brought to you by Civil Service World and Baringa. My name is Sam. I am the editor of Public Technology. We are a sister publication of Civil Service World, and I was really delighted that my friends at CSW asked me to be part of this event, which I think is going to play host to a fascinating and incredibly timely discussion. I'm even more delighted that I'm joined by such a fantastic panel of experts who bring with them a variety of experiences, and I will introduce them and you'll get to know more about them very shortly, I promise. And thereafter, I will try and do my best to keep quiet and allow you to hear from them for the next hour or so. But before that, I'm just going to briefly introduce today's event, kind of frame the topic that we're here to talk about and explain how everything is going to work. So the strapline for today's discussion that you've probably seen is from funding to fulfilment, building confidence in public sector, digital and AI transformation. Now there's quite a lot going on there, quite a bit to unpack, but perhaps the key word is building, because any building project is a complex undertaking that probably needs to be informed by a very clear blueprint, needs to begin with strong foundations from which it needs to progress gradually, brick by brick, and be supported throughout that by pretty rigorous assurance processes. Government digital programs are clearly similar in their complexity and in their need for very careful progression and pretty constant attention. In our title, we went from funding to fulfilment, just like that, in a couple of easy words. But in the real world, of course, such a journey could take decades. It may, in fact, not feel like one continuous journey, but probably a succession of smaller trips between one staging post and the next, possibly including a few left turns and maybe even a dead end or two along the way. But between each of those pit stops, there will obviously be significant challenges, cultural, financial, technical. And this means that the confidence that is hopefully being built and that we're here to talk about, that confidence, whether it's that of ministers, the public, of our friends in the Treasury, that is something that is a delicate thing that needs a lot of protection from threat. But we are hopefully going to address that kind of risk with a can-do attitude today and maybe think about and share with you some insights on how those kind of challenges along the way can be faced up to and overcome. And ultimately how government can then go on to realise some of the really, really ambitious digital plans that have been set for it, particularly in the last few months, last year or so. Essentially for the next hour, we are just going to have a chat. We don't have any PowerPoint or any presentations or anything like that. I've just got a whole bunch of questions that I'm really looking forward to putting to our panel. But I would absolutely encourage you from wherever you're joining us today to get involved as well. The benefit of these virtual events is that we can consider questions throughout the discussion. We don't have to wait till the end and kind of pass a microphone round. We'll probably focus a bit more on your questions as we move into the second half of the event, but by all means, while the discussion is ongoing, anything you want to ask, anything that crops up, a question you want to ask one or more of our panelists, or if you just want to share a thought or experience, contribute to the discussion, do please use the chat function. It should be pretty obvious on your screen. Do go there. I'll be keeping a close eye on that. I think you can also upvote questions from your fellow viewers. And that being the case, we'll try and address those questions as democratically as we can. But I think that's quite enough from me to begin with. Let's introduce you to our panel. I think in time-honoured fashion, I'll come to each of you and get a quick introduction. Let's begin with Karl Hoods CBE, Group Chief Digital and Information Officer at the Departments for Energy Security and Net Zero and Science, Innovation and Technology, which I think is a role that's part of a fairly interesting kind of unit in Whitehall, the ICS unit. Karl, thanks so much for being here. Great to have you. Could we get a quick intro to you and your role and a little bit of overview of how it kind of pertains to this discussion that we're having today?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, so I'm senior across those two departments, but I lead Integrated Corporate Services Digital, which is a shared service function. So we provide a desktop service to 3 departments and 10 agencies at the moment. So what we're trying to do there is really look at how we can provide some kind of common approaches and standardization to the technology that we're delivering. So we've approached that in 3 layers, which we might get into more detail later, but effectively utility services that could be common and standard across multiple organizations, a set of common platforms, which we think we've got a kind of way of consolidating down disparate requirements and producing more of a kind of product-based approach to what we deliver, and then things that are bespoke, so where we identify things that we think are unique to a particular circumstance or context, then we can provide that. But crucially, at the kind of bespoke and common platform layer, always looking for the opportunities where we can cycle it into the one below, so that we're driving convergence and commonality. So yeah, interesting and exciting times, lots to do.
Absolutely. We'll look forward to talking to you more about all that as we go along. But next, if I can come to Dia Nag, the Director of Digital at BetterGov, also has a pretty track record of experience in some senior government posts. Dia, great to have you with us this morning. Thanks so much for being here. Could we get a quick intro to you and your role and how it kind of relates to what we're here to talk about today?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here. Sam, I am Dia Nag, Director of Digital for BetterGov. I've just moved to the other side, the consultancy side. It's been 3 months this week. So pretty exciting. In general, I've got like 30 years of experience doing digital transformation, product service transformation, across public and private sector, mainly public sector. In the last 10 years, I've been a civil servant, and it was basically a difficult decision leaving that side. I've been leading strategy and transformation for the Cabinet Office for quite a bit in different roles and capacities. And I think this is a really interesting discussion, and specifically the reason I'm finding very interesting is being from the other side now. I've seen all the challenges and the intention and the aspirations of what we want to do when I was in this other side as a government employee, and now from a consultancy world. To be very honest, the problems and the challenges are same, and it's finding how can you support your government colleagues and the wider public sector through practical, experiences and practical, actually, how can you move, as you said, from that funding to the fulfillment? What are the real things can we do as consultants, as suppliers, to aid government to achieve modernizing government and the ambitions they have in their digital transformation? So I'm really looking forward.
Likewise, it's great to have that kind of duality of experience from you, from the having seen both sides of the fence, as it were. So great to have you here. Thanks so much for being part of it. But next, if I can come to Umbar Shakir, who is from Gartner. Sorry, I've just expert partner and EMEA lead for AI at Gartner Consulting. Umbar, thank you so much for being part of this. Great to have you here. Can we get a quick intro to you and your role at Gartner and how that kind of fits into the discussion about government transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Umbar. I am leading EMEA AI across Gartner Consulting. So I've got lots of hands dirty projects at the moment on scaling AI with clients. I've been in tech consulting for the last 26 years, ex-IBM, PwC, PA Consulting. I scaled my own consulting firm with my friends for the last 10 years, and we sold our company to Havas, which is the 4th largest advertising agency network in the world. I held the chief AI officer position there. So actually embedding AI across an advertising, media and marketing network was lots of learnings there, and also was maintaining all of my consulting roles. So whether that's in life sciences, the national security agencies in the UK, helping set up the Defence AI unit for MOD, and working in local authorities as well. I've got lots of public sector experience around where we're going from experimenting, stabilizing, and now scaling AI across departments. So yeah, hopefully got some stories to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that question of scaling projects is going to be such a key one in government. I know there's a lot of, not just in government, but so many proofs of concepts going on. I think that's a really important part of it. I'm sure we'll dig into that a bit more as we go along. But finally, if I can introduce you all to Adam Brocklesby, who is a partner and expert in government and public sector for Baringa. Adam, really great to have you here and being part of this discussion. Thanks so much for joining us. Could we get a quick intro to you and your role and how that fits into the work you do with public sector clients?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Sam, and good morning, everyone. Adam Brocklesby. I'm a partner at Baringa Partners. Similar to some of my colleagues on the line, I've been working in the digital and technology industry for over 20 years across both public and private sector, but the last 15 years or so in public sector. I lead Baringa's digital and AI practice for public sector, which means I work with government clients to support them with digital and AI strategy, innovation, and adoption. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. Well, yeah, just a quick reminder that do please get your contributions and your questions coming in on the chat box on your right. I'll be keeping an eye on those. But I'll start with some of my own. Karl, I'll come to you if I may. I guess if we kind of start at the beginning, in a sense, and when you're starting out, when a government agency is starting out on a digital transformation project, it's quite a broad question, I guess, but what are the most important considerations to have at the front of mind, and what is really the key to kind of getting off on the right foot to give yourself the best chance of success?
Yeah, I think the word transformation in itself is an often used and misinterpreted term, right? So sometimes across any organizations I've worked in, getting that real clarity of objective and what the outcome is the crucial bit. And we talk a lot about transformation, but sometimes I question how transformative are we actually being? And there's a difference between digitization and transformation. So I think it's really clear to be, it really helps to be really clear on what it is you're trying to do and what the outcome is you're trying to achieve. Without that North Star, I think it becomes incredibly difficult to actually plot a path to it. And in your kind of opening remarks, you talked about length of time. I think all too often across many sectors, we see big transformation programs, which are, 5-10 years long. Well, for me, that's a journey, definitely a journey. That isn't there's a single program and project to get there. What we need to do is say, hold true that North Star, and then what are the kind of paths we need to take to do that? And then from there, you need to make sure you've got the right resources in place, the right funding, all those other kind of good governance mechanisms that stand true. But it really comes down to me for being that clarity of objective, because without that, it becomes incredibly difficult to achieve anything.
And Dia, if I can come to you on this point, from your experience, both kind of leading transformation programs in government and now kind of being able to take an external view, what would you pick out as the most important things to have in place and to be thinking about right at the very start of a big project?
I think it's the main thing are the users, right? So you start from what's actually the need. What are you trying to solve? What's the problem you're looking at, and not just go straight into the solution, because people and the users are at the heart of everything, and technology is an enabler. Once you've got that basic foundation, as Karl mentioned, what's the outcome you're trying to achieve? What's the problem you're trying to solve? What happens if you don't solve that problem? Is that all right? So once you've got those questions answered, and because sometimes when you talk to different users, whether it's business users or citizens, and this is what I've been seeing, and one of the roles for me joining BetterGov, one of the very few consultancies I've kind of interacted with whose pure plays around what do citizens really want, what do users really want, because there's a difference between a want and a need as well. So to identify that and help organizations you're delivering for understand what's the outcome, what's the impact, what's the value once you solve that problem. I think having those parameters right up front, and obviously the sponsorship buy-in, because sometimes what happens, you're trying to fix a problem, but you don't know who you're solving it for or who's the owner of that. So having some of those critical things like strategic sponsorship, outcomes, user needs, upfront, and also funding. To be honest, sometimes we try and solve something without actually understanding whether we've got the funding to do it. So without actually moving really way into the thing and establishing something, having those critical things up front and understood by each and every one within that problem space, whether it's your stakeholder or your user base or the people, the delivery supply, everyone, I think that's the most critical. And then you can, think about transformation, etc. But keeping users and people at the heart of everything is what I think is very critical.
It's clearly, it's important to have objectives and outcomes in mind from those two answers. I guess it's also important at the start of a project to think about or anticipate and engage with some of the challenges you're likely to face along the way. Adam, perhaps if I can come to you first here, when you're kind of setting out with a public sector client, perhaps, what are you thinking about in terms of the biggest or most common challenges that they're likely to face in delivering a digital transformation project?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I guess in my opinion, the technology is ready. And when you think about barriers or challenges, in my opinion, I don't think technology is a barrier anymore. I think, we all know how quickly technology is evolving, and that Moore's law is a distant memory in terms of the speed of acceleration. But I think, even if technology stood still today, we could completely transform digital government over the course of this Parliament. But it's our systems, it's our funding, it's our delivery models that aren't yet able to support this. So maybe if I start with funding, and Dia mentioned this in her earlier response, I think one of the most significant barriers is a structural mismatch between how digital initiatives should be delivered in an agile, iterative and outcome-focused way, and how government traditionally funds and governs these projects. Technology is currently funded in the same way as a new hospital, with an initial burst of investment and then a smaller allowance for maintenance costs. But obviously technology has moved on, enabled by cloud and software as a service products, and I think the funding models need to adapt to this. I guess this isn't new news. The performance review of digital spend published in March clearly sets this out, and GDS and Treasury are progressing with Pathfinder projects to test alternative funding models. So I'm optimistic that we have the right conditions to start to look at this problem differently. And obviously, I'm sure we all saw in the spending review yesterday that the planned reforms to the Green Book, which again I think should support this. I guess the next thing I'd say is legacy tech. So beyond funding, it's well known, and the State of Digital Government review highlighted that critical services and national infrastructure depend on decades-old technology, and until we address this, the risk associated with the legacy estate will continue to constrain innovation. We at Baringa recently did some work to assess the economic harm of cyber attacks on public services, and moving forward, we hope this type of analysis and modelling can underpin more compelling benefits cases for underpinning tech transformation. And then finally, I'd just say, I think efficiency, and this may not be popular with some of my Treasury colleagues, but I think the focus on efficiency may stifle innovation if not applied in the right way. So it's entirely possible to operate a particular process extremely efficiently that actually shouldn't need to be done at all. So I think efficiency without reimagining public services risks just automating broken processes. Karl mentioned this in his opening remarks, but I think there's been loads of progress digitizing forms and streamlining citizen journeys, but the onus still tends to be on the citizen or the applicant. So if we look at things like housing benefit, if a citizen experiences a life event like a job loss or a disability claim, we could offer proactive benefit suggestions. We could pre-populate applications using data that the councils and sort of broader government already hold in terms of council tax records and universal credit information, and then use AI to assess eligibility instantly based on linked data sets and notify the citizen of the approved amounts with no need for them to apply in the sort of traditional sense of the word. So I think digital technology and emerging technology gives us the opportunity to reimagine the problem and not just digitize existing methods, but we do need to think differently in order to exploit this opportunity.
Great, thank you, Adam. Yeah, there's a lot of really crucial stuff there. I think definitely the piece about funding models, that's something I've heard time and again in my discussions with civil servants about the things that stymie their ambitions or the things that get in the way of scaling really innovative digital projects. So that'd be really interesting to see how that kind of work on new models develops in the coming months. But Amber, if I can come to you perhaps on this question about challenges you mentioned in your opening remarks, a lot of the experience you've had in scaling companies and in the kind of individual projects as well. When government or anybody really is setting out on a big digital transformation project, what would you kind of pick out as the big challenges that they should be thinking about right from the get-go?
I love the answer that Adam gave and concur with a lot of what he was saying. So to build on what he was saying, some of the other barriers to scaling AI is decision making and governance, and a lot of governance that we have. And to Karl's point, I love that we make with technology for the last 30 years, we've kind of made shifts within the existing paradigm, and we've taken Victorian work practices, brought them into offices, put them onto ERP systems, digitized it all. But when we've never really taken the opportunity to make the paradigm shift that some of this technology around AI can actually give to us. And it means that from those Victorian practices and safeguards, we use governance to optimize for risk rather than optimizing for speed and innovation and decision making. And I think that's going to need to fundamentally change given the rate of innovation with this type of technology. The other thing, I was in Washington at a large public good bank. I'm sure you can guess who I'm talking about. Very complicated international remit, looking at impact outcomes for public good and sustainability. And the 4 key things that we've started to identify in minimum viable decision making is the idea worth doing? So does it align to outcomes and impact? Do we have the funding and investment to do this thing? Do we have the capability and capacity to deliver it? And the extra thing that we're now seeing in a lot of companies is, do I have the data accessibility and the compute power to be able to execute on that initiative? And some of these things around how much compute power we're going to need going forward and do this technology in sustainable ways is really important. So starting to consider some different things, but also looking at your governance and going, are there minimum viable decision pathways, and are we clear where the decisioning rights and the decisioning parameters are? Because when we were talking about defence and national security, when you're up against enemy states and the speed at which they're able to do things in fairly unethical ways, how can we keep our ethical high ground? The only way we can really compete is going to be on speed of decision making and speed of innovation.
Great, thank you. I can see at this point that we've got a good few questions already coming in from the audience, which is great. We will get to those. I've made a careful note. We'll get to those in due course, but do keep them coming. We want to engage with you today. But for the time being, if I can maybe dig into one kind of issue that's maybe a little bit kind of nebulous and fluffy in a sense, and that of the kind of culture, organizational culture that can either support or I guess hamper projects that are being delivered, maybe, rightly or wrongly, but I think certainly in reality, a lot of people think of government's culture as a bit risk averse and not always the perfect breeding ground for the kind of innovation we're talking about. Dia, if I can come to you as someone who's now, kind of seen a little bit of both sides of the fence, what do we kind of mean by a culture that best supports innovation, and how would you kind of characterize what that looks like in government and how effective it is?
So from a culture point of view, we did a lot of work at Cabinet Office on that. I think it's, so this is, again, coming back to the whole people centricity, right? So technology is just an enabler, as I keep saying, it's the people. So, building an environment where people feel safe, to fail and learn, because it's all right to try out new things and fail, iterate. It brings to the much talked about test and learn as well. It's empowering teams to be confident, to test things, do some research, ideate, implement, fail. So I think it's creating that environment within any organization, whether you're on this side, either side of the fences, having that confidence in your leadership to support that kind of environment where, it's very safe to do something and be wrong, but then learn from that and again go back. So I think that is the main cultural shift. And it is, and you're correct, government is risk averse, but there are reasons why they are risk averse as well, right? So I've been in quite critical positions. So it becomes difficult to take some risks because of various reasons. But I think what at Cabinet Office, I could really see what the culture we were shifting to is the leadership team across all 43 business units. We're giving people within their teams that empowerment and enabling them with guide rails, etc., and the tools that can make them confident, whether it's scaling a new technology or trying out a new product service, doing research. But it's building that psychological safe environment, which is really critical, which also then leads into the thing around diversity and inclusiveness, right? Because it's all about inclusive thoughts, new ways of working, and having the ability and the leadership support to try out new things. So that's my point of view from a cultural shift. And I think I think something Karl pointed out, transformation, right? It is quite loosely used, but real transformation is that for me, when people within your organizations are ready, because until you've got the buy-in from everyone, it's not really ever going to change. So I think that's the heart of everything.
And Adam, if I can come to you on this as well, I guess, as someone who kind of comes from a private sector entity and goes in and helps kind of government clients, how would you kind of characterize the culture you encounter, and why is culture such an important thing in kind of delivering transformative change?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And I couldn't agree with Dia's points more strongly, really. I think, culture is often the silent killer of transformation. And I think we are still battling somewhat siloed mindsets where, policy, operations, technology and data work in parallel rather than in, unified multidisciplinary teams. Dia mentioned the point around risk aversion, and I loved Amber's earlier point around minimum viable decision making. I think there is, in my experience, the constraining factor isn't the absence of ideas. Actually, there's countless proofs of concept that are happening across government, but there's so far modest success in terms of scaling. And so I think a mature culture should embrace governance and control alongside iterative delivery. So it's in my mind, it's about equipping leaders with the permission to explore, but with the confidence that they're supported to, as Dia said, fail fast and sort of scale responsibly. I think the only other build I would add is about skills. So we are suffering somewhat from a lack of digital skills and hence confidence at the top of our departments, and then this permeates across the department. So I think digital skills should be seen as important as financial management in leadership positions, and it's important that everyone has a degree of literacy in these. So I saw the announcement on Monday and welcome it from the Cabinet Office that all civil servants will get AI training as part of this year's One Big Thing project, and I genuinely hope and I'm optimistic that starts to make the cultural shift that we need.
Sam, can I just comment on some of that? Is that all right?
Yeah, please do.
A couple of bits there. So, I mean, in some ways, like we go through this a lot about civil service being risk averse and slow to deliver and blah, 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 all the rest of that stuff. I question whether that's any different to any large organization, effectively. Context is key, right? And as Dia said, there are some constraints in which we work with. We've touched on a few. That's no different in my mind to regulated industries. I take my team a lot to go and speak to other sectors and other industries about what are they doing around transformation and innovation, etc. The one thing that really stands out is that, they are operating within their constraints. we're doing exactly the same thing. So I think it's about plotting a path through that. We know it can be done. We managed to deliver 6 emergency energy schemes over a space of 12 weeks, right? So that is rapid delivery, moving quite quickly. The bit for me that we're trying to do a bit more of is bring in more systems thinking and more of a product mindset so that we can have that relentless focus on our customer base, whatever the customer may be, a citizen, a business, etc. So I think that's where we could do more, I believe. And to Adam's point about the kind of skills, there's definitely a whole skills thing that we're approaching and trying to do a lot more and partner more with our internal users over capability and what we're doing. But also at a board level, I've got a few non-exec roles. And I always find myself at events like this saying, I am the lone digital voice in a room full of accountants, predominantly. When I look around the board tables of non-exec roles, it is heavily weighted to corporate governance in terms of a finance and risk perspective, very little in terms of digital technology skills. So I think there's something about boardrooms in general that we need to kind of figure out, why doesn't digital play a more kind of prominent role, a prominent voice in that space? It's acceptable for everybody on a board to have an understanding of a P&L, what you might do around some HR risks, etc. There's still that gap in the digital world. So I'll be interested in others' views about how we try and bridge that and what we can do and what impact that might have.
Yeah, absolutely. Loads of really meaty stuff to chew on there. But if I may, I'd like to maybe start engaging a little bit with our audience questions as well. Amber, I'll come to you if I may. We've had several come in, as one might expect, about AI and how we approach that. So one of our viewers, pointed out that AI is still relatively nascent. Should the public sector kind of wait for really mainstream, off-the-shelf products that they can buy, or are they better getting people in early to kind of build bespoke tools? Another of our viewers asked, about the difficulties in kind of building clarity around your vision for something like AI when it changes so rapidly and develops so fast. Amber, kind of combining all that into one probably slightly awkwardly phrased question. How does government, how should it be approaching kind of its work with AI, and when it's thinking about how to best engage with maybe building its own tools or waiting to buy things off the shelf, or how, what are the most useful ways to engage with this?
Well, I think there's so much hype at the moment around AI. And from a emerging technology perspective, I kind of go, having been doing this for almost 30 years, like we've seen these waves of technology come and go before, right? So, and we haven't been learning from some of the patterns of what were there. And I loved what Karl said at the beginning, and Dia and Adam have solidified that and supported that, which is, to what end, for what gain, at what cost? That's fundamentally still holds true whether you're in the private sector, the public sector, etc. And I think people, there's this hype or sense of fear of missing out and FOMO, like that get me some AI. There are leaders who are saying, get me some AI. Let's get 1,000 flowers blooming with proof of concepts left, right, and centre. And I know I'm part of Gartner. Gartner put out lots of data about AI, and I can, I have this dissonance about the hype that we're all contributing to, consultancies included in that. But I'm so happy to see that there are people like myself, like-minded, who are really pushing for purposeful, meaningful, responsible look at technology. And it's not just about AI, any emerging technology. So I recently had worked with in the housing sector to launch the first smart estate in East London. And we were having the same conversations about smart city technology that we're having about AI products at the moment. And I love what Karl said about taking a product mindset, about the rate of innovation is very fast, granted. But we still need to be going, what's the outcome we're trying to achieve? Because a lot of people are spending a lot of money at the moment on Copilot licenses and other GPT type pieces chasing productivity gains that our research is showing is not paying off. Now, if you're trying to pay to future-proof digital dexterity in your teams, or to get tech adoption in your teams, that's a noble cause. But if you're chasing efficiency and productivity, you're paying a lot of money to do that right now. So be really clear about what race it is that you're in. Many companies are looking at hyperscalers and feeling that fear of missing out. As a department, you're probably not in the same race as a hyperscaler. So what is it that the race from an AI perspective you're actually in? Be clear on that. But then come back to commerciality. Are those T-shirts and flip-flops over there that are purporting a really cool AI product that fits your need actually going to be in business in 3 years' time? And do I want to have that as part of the fabric and the infrastructure of my enterprise architecture the way it currently is? Now, if you're in a place where you've got modular architecture and you can do that flexibility, that's great. Most organizations, and Karl, you're absolutely right, whether it's life sciences, whether it's CPGs, I've got the same problems across public sector and private sector around speed of decision making, risk aversion, regulatory compliance, and culture. So all of the things we touched upon. But I think if you start to come back and look at commerciality, the outcome, the race that you're actually in, I come back to what end, for what gain, at what cost, still holds true for everyone.
Absolutely. I think that's something probably should always be considered, in any project, in any sector. Absolutely. I can see we've got some other questions coming. We'll get to those in a bit. A reminder for our audience, do please keep them coming. We want to engage with them. Dia, you look like you want to come in on this.
I completely agree with what Umbar said. I think, emerging technologies are always exciting, right? We really when blockchain came, we all got so excited and we wanted to do everything. So, but I think my point is, again, being a very product-centric person, is we don't need to build a vision for a certain AI model, right? Like, what's the problem are we trying to solve with AI? That is the question. If we can answer that with all the factors Umbar stated, that what's the problems space that AI is going to really help us, I think we can have a strategic vision around that. And from there, you have then, each industry and each client, each organization can then tailor their need to align to that framework, to that guide rail, to that strategic objective that you're trying to solve with a new technology.
And Dia, not every problem is going to have an AI shaped answer, right?
Exactly.
So, and I think we need to apologize for my cheesiness, but a 90s movie reference, but the Jurassic Park scientist, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And sometimes some of these AI solutions are actually more expensive than other technologies that are already on our estate that could answer those problems.
It could be as simple as automation, like for a business process optimization, right? You don't have to go into robotic automation or stuff like that just to do a simple thing. So it's the difference between the want and the need. So again, coming back to, we don't have to deliver what we want. It's the need, it's the user need. So I think it's coming back to that again.
Yeah, absolutely. Loads of stuff to chew on there. I think it's a case of kind of managing in the public sector's case, ministers' excitement sometimes, and in the private sector, probably senior leaders, the get me some AI, as you said, Umbar. But if I may now, I'd like to come on to the kind of issue of kind of how government can think about transformation, maybe in a broader and more holistic way. I guess the nature of the beast for any industry, but probably more so than anywhere else in government, is that it's often responding to a particular challenge or need or service demand. Adam, if I can come to you on this, if I may, what are the benefits and how can government maybe start to think about addressing transformation in that more holistic way rather than just firefighting in cases or just responding to a particular policy or delivery need? How can you kind of zoom out a bit?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Look, I think this is absolutely critical to start to look at sort of system-wide challenges and start to think holistically rather than at an individual initiative level. So, you touched on this, Sam, but right now a number of transformation efforts are reactive. They can be triggered by new legislation or failing systems or the budgetary cycles, and is it transformation or is it just survival mode? And I think, Karl touched on this, but we know what good looks like. Karl mentioned the rapid delivery of the energy relief schemes, and that kind of sort of integrated end-to-end delivery. I mean, that should be the norm rather than the exception. So I think there's, I guess my personal view on this is our ambition should be no transformation, actually. So we should be continuously improving. So not looking at like big bang or crisis-led rescue missions, just really smart multidisciplinary teams delivering better outcomes over time. But I do think that needs a shift from what is often considered isolated time-boxed projects to more sort of sustained or sustainable service ownership models that look at multi-year outcome-focused portfolios. So that's I guess when we were speaking earlier about AI, and I agree with the points made by my colleagues entirely. AI is part of the toolbox that should be considered when exploring end-to-end citizen journeys or journeys for businesses interacting with government departments. We shouldn't expect or accept that someone moving house should need to engage with 5-10 different departments as they as they do so. But I think if we don't move from managing digital as a set of discrete initiatives and move to a service lifecycle approach, then we'll miss opportunities and potentially risk eroding public trust.
And Karl, if I can come to you on this, to what extent do you find that the transformative projects that you're delivering are kind of rapid fire response to something that needs to be done, and how do you find you're able to kind of think about things in a more strategic and more holistic way, and how can we better do that?
Yeah, I think there's a combination, right? Because we don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the world that we operate in. Exactly the same when I was at Save the Children previously, right? Nobody wanted a crisis in the world. They happened. We had to be able to respond at pace and do that. I think where both in that organisation and here, what we've tried to do with this platform-based approach is be really mindful about what's our hunch of the thing, what are the patterns that we've seen time and time again. And what can we put in place that will cope with those? And in taking that product mindset, it means that we can then start to service that demand and really configure for the context. So if we take grants as an example, there may well be multiple grant management systems and services around. Historically, probably always been done for a particular specific outcome in mind. Whereas if you look at the pattern and the blueprint for it, there's probably 80 to 90% of those follow the same thing. It's the context again, which is really different. So our strategy has been to place our bets on what do we know we've got to do stuff with data. So here's our data management service and platform around that as a foundational layer. We know we're going to need to do something in the workflow, case management, grant sort of space. Let's build a platform out for that kind of use case, etc. And then that enables us to then service the demand, whether that's a well thought out and it's a strategic initiative, or it's we need to be able to respond to thing X that's popped up. How can we do that at pace? It also enables us, because we don't have the engineering capacity, to be able to leverage all of the R&D that the likes of Microsoft and Salesforce and ServiceNow, etc., are putting into those platforms. So when the question about how do we be more efficient or effective in our processes become, I don't have to think about building an engineering team to do our own LLM and then what's going to be the front end for that. It's like, what can we leverage within those? If that's our first port of call and we need to make a process more effective or more efficient, or there's an opportunity to improve it, we do that inside the platform. If we can't, then genuinely we will look at something else. So that's kind of our strategy has been on that basis, which really means we can respond pretty quickly to most most things. The question becomes about, what is that intent? What are we trying to achieve? Are we really clear on that? And again, having those foundational layers in place means that if that does change and we have to develop and change policy or outcome on the go as we're moving through that journey, we're in a good place to be able to respond to it again, because we've got 80% of what we need before we've even started.
Great, thank you, Karl. It's obviously great to be able to think about things in a broad and strategic way, but I think it's a reality that we always need the kind of nuts and bolts of the right infrastructure in place. Dia, I'll come to you on this if I may. We've had a couple of questions come in. We had one earlier about the extent to which we think government is actually considering whether the tech infrastructure it has in place is sufficient to implement digital innovation. We've had a couple of other references to legacy tech and what have you. From your experience, how much is this considered, and how big a potential challenge is the kind of tech infrastructure that's in place to deliver digital initiatives?
Well, I mean, there is legacy, right? There is legacy, but we have kind of moved. So, for example, at the Cabinet Office, I can talk about the Cabinet Office, and when I was in GDS, there is legacy. We've moved from shadow IT to a position where there is less of shadow IT. And it kind of brings back to Karl's point of recognizing. So when we are building, so with a product centricity and a product mindset, when you're building products and services, it's about recognizing those components and reusable patterns, etc., which can then help kind of the whole concept of reuse, which then kind of brings towards a more solid tech infrastructure. But at the end of it, it's just not the tech infrastructure which leads to transformation. There is a lot more around the building blocks and the pillars of transformation. It's, not, the whole concept of siloed and federated organizations and siloed workings. If we can get rid of that, if we can recognize what are the common needs, common problems within organizations, come up with a plan of shared solutions, and that's what the government shared service strategy was all about. Can we build products and services for the entire government, or more than just one team? It's recognizing those components, reusable things, which then lead to cost avoidance, a more strong, solid civil service, which then is not only about legacy IT or tech infrastructure. So it's that kind of a product centricity, move to a service-oriented government than just a tech-orientated and solutions-led government.
Can I come in on that one as well, Sam?
Yeah, please do.
There's a little bit of a burning platform in this technology that I haven't seen in other technologies, which is the number of people with the skills needed to get this stuff done, whether that's ML engineering, ML ops, AI engineers, data science, data engineers. They're just not growing on trees. And for the amount of demand across both private and public sector to future-proof our technology stacks, because AI and the infrastructure in it is going to be a measure of national power as well in the world and geopolitics and where we're going. AI sovereignty is such a big question, and that then talks about wider supply chains for compute power, for chips and components, etc. It's at a micro and a macro level, some of these considerations, but I come back to the burning platform around forcing government and public-private partnerships hands in saying we are going to have to compete at national and international levels in this technology to be viable in the future, and the future of work and how we use humans and the interplay of human and machine. We have to use these resources well because they are so finite, whether that is people, capability, capacity, or whether it's compute power and electricity and water and the minerals that go into the batteries for the compute power. This supply, the macro supply chain of some of this is going to force our hand, and we're going to have to think about the problem slightly differently to ERPs and digitalization in the past.
So I think we've kind of thought about a lot of what we talked about today is about how we kind of embark on the right path and the things we should have in mind when we're kind of setting out and setting our goals. It's obviously incredibly important in delivering any project, but particularly the ones as complex and costly as government delivers, to have the right kind of governance pleasures in place as we go along. Dia, if I can come back to you in kind of your experience, what does really good governance look like? Who's involved in that, and how does government best need to make sure that it has the right kind of monitoring and oversight measures in place throughout delivery of a project to ensure that it achieves what it's really looking to?
I think that some of the products and programs I've worked on which have been successful are through which ones are outcome based. So before you start a program, you can have various level of governance, but if you do not have very trackable outcome metrics defined throughout the process and you're evaluating them on the way, no governance can really work. So my strong recommendation on good governance is based on, what are the clear outcomes the program or the product is trying to deliver? Do we have the right metrics which are trackable in place at every stage of a product, whether you're going from a discovery to alpha to a beta to live? And even some of the things we don't do is when a product goes live, we just let it live. We do not really evaluate the performance. And that is not just a government thing. It's in many sectors I've seen, in many organizations. Unless you're actually tracking the outcomes from against each stage, because you can have major strategic outcomes, but each stage will have very definitive outcomes as well. And if they're not being tracked, and if we don't know if they're doing what they're supposed to do, the impact is not being met, no governance, how many levels of governance you have is going to work. So I think it's the framework having very strong outcome-based, measurable outcomes. And it kind of came up in the spending review that was published, like, the staged funding model, etc., that is being introduced can really, really work well if you have focused tracking mechanisms for outcomes as well. That's where and I have personally felt it in government, outside of government, that's where programs most of the time fail.
Great, thank you, Dia. We're probably getting close to the kind of closing comment section of the event, but we did have one question come in about kind of the role of the digital centre in kind of supporting all this. Karl, I'll come to you if I may. I guess you've been in various departments. I guess in its former home, GDS of the digital centre was a bit further away from you. It's now a bit closer to you in DSIT. I'm trying to find that how the viewer phrased it, but it was something along the lines of what is the most useful thing it can do in terms of setting standards? How does the digital centre, how can it coordinate adoption, set standards, consider appropriate tech platforms, I guess procurement and stuff? Essentially, what are the most useful things that a kind of digital hub, wherever it's based, Cabinet Office or DSIT, what are the most useful things it can do for you as a department?
Well, all of those things you mentioned, right? It's doing and will continue to do. I think for me, there's a role to play around the convening power of getting people together. I think we're all doing very similar things across different departments. I think to the standards, to the governance, to the controls, to everything else that exists in there. I think the digital centre can bring a real focus on clarity about what are the things that we want to achieve and those outcomes, and then collectively, how are we contributing together to working towards those? And I think it's starting to do more of that. We've seen what they're doing with commercial in that sort of space, and updates to standards. We've got other initiative exemplars moving forward. So I think for me, the bit and it's a bit different for ICS because we're providing to multiple departments. So we do a bit of that ourselves anyway. I think we've got a role to play in terms of if we want to pilot something at scale, well, then we've got a nice construct to do that within ICS anyway. How do we then start to broaden that out? So I think it's doing the things it needs to do under the new remit. We need time to kind of get moving on it. So, but yeah, for me, the most powerful thing is bringing people together and sharing knowledge and experience and spotting where there are similar patterns so that we don't repeat those. And if we do repeat them, we're doing it mindfully, to the same standards. It may never be the same tech platforms because we've all got freedom to choose what we need to choose to get the job done within our department. But I think being cognizant of where there's commonality and bringing that together is going to be extremely useful.
Great, thank you for engaging with that, Karl. Hopefully today has been something of an exercise as well in bringing people together to share common experiences for everyone's benefit. We do only have a few minutes left, though, at this point. So I think in kind of time-honoured fashion, I'll come to each of our panellists to get some quick closing thoughts. Maybe this is probably a completely facile way of thinking about it. But Adam, if we were to maybe think about the single most important thing we could take forward from today, or the single most significant step a government body could take to ensure their future digital and AI projects are successful, what would you kind of pick out?
I think if I had to pick one thing, I'd say this. I think adopt a crisis mindset without waiting for a crisis, because if we only move at pace when systems are collapsing or services are breaking, then we will never build a truly digital state. We've seen how responsive government can be when faced with a crisis, and Karl mentioned it earlier with the energy relief schemes, but there was EU exit and the pandemic, and I think that right now we have an incredible opportunity rather than a crisis. We've got political alignment with the Secretary of State, who's made it very clear that digital delivery is essential to delivering the government's missions. We've got the State of Digital Government Review, which set out a really, really clear as-is picture, and then the blueprint for modern digital government, which laid out the plan. So I think the single thing is get on and do. Let's learn through doing. No more pilot paralysis. No more strategy without delivery. Treat this as urgent, even if it's not on fire yet, because I think, if we act like it matters now, as Karl said earlier, we can build that. If we assume 80%, 70% of the foundations are common, and we only need to sort of tailor for the specifics in the final 20%, then let's build those foundations now, and we can build something that lasts into the future.
Great, thank you, Adam. Amber, if I can come to you, if you were to leave us with one closing thought or one really key thing that people could take away about how they approach digital projects, what would you pick out?
Mine is an imploring to everybody to think about, let's not get it wrong this time. Let's stop optimizing processes and let's start to augment human beings. So how do we get the best out of the interplay between the human and the machine, and how do we use and harness technology to help our humans across the government to be more human where it matters?
Brilliant, thank you so much. And Dio, if I could come to you, what would you kind of pick out as a closing thought or thing to think about?
I think for me, the most important thing is let's just keep to the real user need and not assume solution. And, and then what we could also do is learn from, where things have gone wrong and where there are no needs, build a capability where you need. So we fund people and capability and not program. So that's a quite strong thing. I think it'll give us a lot of success if we go.
Great, thank you. And finally, Karl, if I could come to you to get a kind of closing thought or thing that you would think is really important to take away.
Yeah, for me, the mindset piece and the approach to problem solving. And that's not just about technology. It's about how we organize for delivery. It's about, we've mentioned the governance piece. It's like, how do we streamline that? How do we work within the constraints that we've got? Often governance seems to be the place that is their intent to stop something. How do we shift that to be in the place where we're actively encouraging it in those kind of constraints? For me, that's all mindset about how we approach the problem statement that we've got in front of us. Everything else coalesces around that.
Absolutely. What a appropriate note to finish on. Hopefully we can all go forward with that kind of mindset from this point. But unfortunately, that is just about all we have time for. Firstly, a massive thank you to my colleagues here on the panel, Karl, Dia, Amber, and Adam. It's been an absolute pleasure to be in your company, and thank you so much for your time and your expertise that you've given us this morning. Thank you to all of you who've logged in and joined us today. We really do appreciate you taking the time to be part of it. We hope you found it useful. We do. If you have any feedback, we do always value it. But thank you so much for your time, your engagement, and we do hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.